Personal branding does not need to be overwhelmingly complex. It comes down to clarity and consistency. And when you establish that in a few key areas, you're already on your way to a clearly defined and recognizable personal brand. So grab your cup of tea and let's talk about your 5-step personal brand blueprint. From my 15 years working in marketing, communications, and branding, I've learned that you have to do some really important work up front when it comes to any sort of branding project. So it is not all about just how you are selling yourself on certain platforms. You have to have done the work leading up to that first. So today I want to talk about some of those really important steps that I have determined through my own experience are some of the most important steps to take to establish a recognizable and clearly defined personal brand, one that you can be proud of and one that you know is uniquely aligned to you. My tip number one is to define your core values. Do not skip this step. I know when it comes to all things personal branding, it is really easy to want to jump to the more shiny things, the funner things, things like social media, for example. But it is really important to start with your values. And this isn't some woohoo idea. This is how all of the best businesses operate, from iconic global industries to small businesses. Most good business leaders will establish their values first. And that is because when you establish those values, it means that you are moving from the lens of those values. You are making values led decisions in all of your actions, and you are communicating who you are as a person, which I'll get to why that is really important in a second. So, first, I want you to think about if you were to define your personal brand into 4 to 5 core values, what would those values be? And would there be one value, for example, that sits at the center of all of those values, that connects all of the other values together, almost like, as they describe, your North Star? This might be your why, for example. And then when you establish these values, you almost have a bit of a guide or a compass, as I said, to be able to direct your decision making because you know where that fits in your value set. That is why different businesses come across in different ways because they are operating from a different set of values. And why this is really important when it comes to personal branding and what so many people can miss when they are jumping to those shinier steps of personal branding is because this allows you to connect with your people. And this links really nicely to an idea in social psychology about the similarity principle. So, this is the idea that we are naturally drawn to trust or feel more comfortable with people we perceive as similar to ourselves. So, essentially, we like people that seem like us. So, you might, for example, know friends, or you might have friends, or be in a relationship, or know other couples who seem like they are quite opposite or different personalities. But what often connects those people are the common values that they prioritize. I was actually with some friends the other day where someone actually brought this up. We were talking about couples, for example, that can be so different yet so suited to each other. And someone mentioned that it really comes down to value. So even when you notice such a difference in people's personalities, they still share the same values that moves them together in the same direction, that connects them in a particular way that their different personalities wouldn't be able to do. And this can even apply if you aren't so much of an opposites attract sort of friendship or relationship. This can still be the case even if you are really similar in your personalities. It can be that people are really connected to your values because it resonates with what is important to them. And when you are communicating or when you are moving in your personal brand strategy from the place of your values, then you are more likely to connect with your people because you are establishing that similarity principle. I, for example, can think of a few creators that I follow who seem so different to me, but I really connect with their values. I connect with the things that are important to them. So make sure you define your core values, those maybe 4 or 5 core values, before you move on to your next steps. My step number 2 is then to define your tone of voice. So once you understand your core values, you understand what is most important to you. Start to think about how that can come to life in your tone of voice. Brands spend a lot of time considering the tone of voice for their brand. There is a reason why a brand like Louis Vuitton, for example, sounds so different to a brand like Target. They are operating from a different set of values and they are communicating those values from a unique tone of voice that speaks to their target audience. They are designed to be different for a reason. So, if you were to take those values, to consider your natural tone of voice, maybe think about how people have described you in the past, how would you define your tone of voice in, say, 4 or 5 key dimensions? Again, you can draw on that data that other people have provided you, how they have described how you communicate. But you don't actually need to just stop there. And I know a lot of people get really caught up in having an authentic tone of voice, but you might be the kind of person who realizes that a lot of people are describing you in a particular way, but you would actually like to be known for a different tone of voice, or you would like to amplify a tone of voice that you know is already within you that other people maybe don't get to see so much of. So, how would you define this tone of voice? And I've actually done other episodes specifically on your verbal personal brand where I go into a little bit more detail about your personal brand in terms of your tone of voice. So, make sure you check out those episodes as well. Some of them are about elevating your tone of voice, and some are about progressing down a little bit more of a rebrand in your tone of voice. But what would those dimensions of your tone of voice be? Just to give you some ideas in this space, it might be that you are calm versus bold, or creative versus corporate, or formal versus informal. It could be that you are casual versus sophisticated. It could be that you are funny versus elegant. And that's not to say that any of those combinations can't also be used with each other. That's what makes a tone of voice so unique, is that you pick the dimensions that are most related to you. So you could have what would naturally be considered an opposite as a part of your own personality. And that is why tone of voice can also be such an important element of personal branding, because a lot of people sometimes can be held back by, wanting to communicate a particular message, but feeling like that message is already out there, or that product or that service is already out there, and the market is completely saturated by people that are already doing what you might want to be doing. But that is where tone of voice can be so unique, because it can be how people connect with you. You might have the exact same message as someone else, but they might just resonate with the way that you communicate it, your tone of voice, your verbal identity, more than someone else. And that is where you have the opportunity to find your people. My step number 3 would be to create a signature style. Now, we can come up with the best tone of voice in the world. We can pick all of the perfect words. But sometimes it isn't about what you say or how you say it, but just how you present yourself, how you express yourself, the non-verbal aspects of your personal brand, the visual personal brand that you present. As the renowned artist Georgia O'Keeffe said, I found I could say things with color and shapes that I couldn't say in any other way. Things I had no words for. So, what I think is really useful when it comes to defining your personal style is to consider your style personality. Now, I know that there are a lot of archetypes in this space. There are plenty of stylists, for example, that talk about the different archetypes that your signature style might fit into. And I've covered some of this on my blog as well. But to really simplify this, what I feel is most useful is to try and identify your style in just a really simple statement, even just a few words to describe the style that you think you have or that you would want to express. For example, is it timeless with a twist? Is it modern elegant? Is it bold and creative? Is it cozy chic? And also, a really important step is to define the colors of your personal brand. Now, you might be the kind of person who loves to wear every color under the sun, and I think that is fantastic if that is your personal style. But maybe when it comes to your actual brand and the way that you communicate in, say, some of your actual collateral that you have for your brand, that you define a signature color palette for yourself. And where I think this can be really cool, if you are the kind of person who has a more refined palette, is to consider adopting this, if you haven't already, as a part of your personal style as well. If there is some synergy there to how you would normally dress or how you would like to dress. I love seeing creators who have completely embraced their brand in this way. I think it is just one of the nicest, nuanced ways of communicating your personal brand in a really recognizable way. I actually heard a creator once say that some of the best branding advice that they got in terms of the look and feel for their YouTube channel was to wear their brand colors. And when you have a defined palette for your personal brand, just like any business would, it becomes recognizable. People start to associate you with a particular look and feel. And colors are really important because they communicate for you. We have been conditioned to associate particular colors to different meanings. So define a core palette that maybe refines your colors down to perhaps 4 or 5 different colors, and ask yourself what they communicate for you, if that is what you want to express for your personal brand. And if you need any more inspiration on defining your color palette or defining your signature style, I have done multiple episodes on this as well. So make sure you check out those too. My step number 4 is to define your personal brand one-liner. Now, this is something that I just recently spoke about on this channel because one of my favorite frameworks, as I've mentioned, is Donald Miller's Building a Story brand framework, because it really gets you to think about how you are serving your audience, how you are serving your customer. And I think that that is such an important place to start when it comes to establishing your personal brand. No matter what area you are in, whether you are considering it from a professional standpoint or more of a personal standpoint, there is always going to be a problem that you are solving. And the framework allows you to consider what that is. But what I love is actually distilling that down into a one-liner, really simplifying the process as much as possible. And the way that Donald Miller describes doing this is to focus on 3 key elements. So focus on the problem that you are helping people solve, the solution that you have to offer. So maybe it's the product, the service, the content that you have to offer. And what is the transformational state? What is it that they are going to be able to experience as their form of success, as that promised land, as that end goal from the solutions that you have been able to provide them? And again, this formula applies no matter what angle you're considering your personal brand goals from. So, for example, I don't actually follow many fashion creators at all, but there was one that stood out to me years ago for a few reasons, actually, now that I think about it, that we've talked about today. I loved her color palette. I loved her tone of voice. And on her Instagram bio, in 3 words, she basically summed up what this one liner is trying to achieve. It simply said, everyday outfit inspiration. And I know that that can apply to so many creators. But as I mentioned, I'd already connected with her personal brand for other different reasons as well. And so when I landed on her profile, I could really see the problem that she was helping to solve. She was providing inspiration for everyday outfits, for everyday styling. And I'm not saying that everyone will be able to get their one liner down to 3 words, but going through this process of thinking about the problem, the solution, the transformation means that you can skip a lot of the really complicated steps and just distill this idea down to that formula. And you don't need to necessarily always communicate or emphasize what the problem is, as long as you are communicating the solution, the transformation in a way that implicitly address what that particular problem could be. And this might not be something that you are necessarily even publicly communicating in some instances, but you know in your own mind that your content, your product, or your service is solving a particular problem for a particular group of people, and you understand how it is that you do that. And my step number 5 is to create communication and connection systems. So this is all about, now at this point, considering, once you have defined your personal brand, how you are expressing that in the world, how you are actually thinking beyond yourself and connecting with other people, building those relationships, contributing to or leading a sense of community around your personal brand. Now, one of the ways that you are probably most likely going to consider doing this, if you're thinking about personal branding, is establishing an online presence. But when you do that, ask yourself some really key questions. Consider, for example, where are my audience most likely to show up? So this means that it's not just about the latest platform or what you think is the most popular. It's where your audience most likely is. But then, as a part of that as well, ask yourself if you resonate with those platforms. Do you yourself enjoy showing up on those platforms? Is it something that, if you're not doing already, you can see yourself enjoying? Consider as well how you might show up on those platforms, because that could take a different form depending on what your preferences are. How are you optimizing certain features of that platform, for example? For example, I on LinkedIn will regularly post articles, and this is something that I really enjoy doing. I'll post multiple articles a week on LinkedIn. But I also know, for example, that LinkedIn is a place where people can share their videos. This is something that LinkedIn is really trying to push at the moment. And while I share my videos and my podcasts in my LinkedIn articles, that they're embedded in my LinkedIn articles, the idea of just showing up on my feed, at least at this stage, with videos isn't something that resonates with me. I love doing that on my YouTube channel, but it's not something that I want to do on LinkedIn. There's a certain way that I want to use LinkedIn. So define the platforms that you would most like to show up on, how you want to show up on them, how often you see yourself as well being able to sustainably show up on them. So not just what you are told is the benchmark of what you should be aiming for, but what you can actually achieve, what actually feels like something that you can manage. And when you are deciding on the platforms that you most want to show up on, also ask yourself how these platforms can be optimized across each other. So for example, if you are creating a piece of content on one channel, say like LinkedIn, for example, are you also sharing that content in other places? So for example, I have a blog on my website, And that is where my articles are first published before I also share them onto LinkedIn. So, how are you making the most of all of that effort that you are putting in? How are you increasing your return on investment? And when you're thinking about your content, what is really helpful is to define your content into key pillars. So, for example, if you were to pick maybe 3 or 4 key content pillars that most of your content tends to fall within, what would they be? And they don't need to be super restrictive in themselves, because within those pillars, for whatever you decide, there could be different types of content as well. So that is something that you can consider as well. So, for example, on this channel, I don't just talk about personal branding, I often also talk about personal development. And that can take a few different forms. Sometimes I'm talking about productivity and daily habits and routines. And then I'm also talking about books, for example, which don't necessarily link directly to some of the more traditional ideas around personal branding. But I know that they are still really important to the people that care about those things. And if you follow my channel, you would come to expect that I'm going to be talking about books every so often as well. It is something that I'm often talking about in most of my episodes, and then I will do a deep dive in other episodes about particular books that I want to explore in more detail. So even within the personal development pillar, for example, there are multiple forms that can take. And when you are deciding the platforms that you most want to show up on and what your strategy is going to be, don't feel like you need to do absolutely everything all at once. Some of my favorite advice that I heard when I was initially exploring more about personal branding was from Mike Kim, an absolute guru in this space, where in his book, You Are the Brand, he talks about this idea of strategizing like a Chinese zodiac. So instead of feeling like, for example, I need to show up on all of these platforms within the next 6 months or within the next year, you pick a key focus every year. So, for example, the year of the blog or the year of videos. And then you add a new element to the lineup every year. So, you don't need to master it all at once. You are working on mastering these particular systems before you add a new element to the lineup. And over time, this really has the potential to build into something really special that you have been able to build skills in a much more sustainable way than trying to do everything all at once. But also remember that when it comes to your personal brand, it's not all about just how you are showing up online. This can also relate back to how you are showing up offline as well. So consider, for example, how you plan to do that. Is this through memberships to clubs or associations? Is this being part of particular programs? Is this attending particular types of networking events? Or maybe there is a particular community that you'd really like to be a part of? Or is this, for example, really prioritizing the one-to-one meetings or coffee catch-ups that you are having with people? And then ask yourself how your different systems, your offline systems and your online systems, can potentially communicate with each other. How can you establish some synergies across those as well? Thanks so much. For more on all things personal branding, subscribe for more like this, and I'll see you in the next episode.